Picture a full-size American family car from 1962. 4 doors, or 2 in a sensible color. A wide bench seat, chrome trim. The kind of car a father drove to work and a family took to church on Sunday. Now imagine that exact-looking car pulling up to a drag strip and demolishing the so-called performance cars of its day. Running the quarter mile in the low 12-second range, hitting over 115 miles an hour. This was not a sports car. It was a Pontiac Catalina, and under its ordinary full-size body sat one of the most ferocious engines America had ever sold to the public. Most people, asked when the muscle car was born, will tell you 1964 with the Pontiac GTO. But the truth is that 2 years earlier, in the very same showrooms, Pontiac was already selling a car that did everything the muscle car would later be praised for, and did it harder. It is called the Catalina Super Duty. Almost no one remembers it, and the reason it was forgotten while the GTO became a legend is one of the most revealing stories in all of American car history. To understand the Catalina, you have to understand what Pontiac was at the very start of the 1960s. For years, Pontiac had been General Motors' sensible, slightly dull brand. Good cars for reliable people. But a new generation of leadership wanted to change that completely. They wanted Pontiac to mean performance. And their strategy was not advertising. It was winning. Pontiac threw itself into motorsport, into NASCAR stock car racing, and into NHRA drag racing with total commitment. And to win, it needed power. So Pontiac's engineers developed a line of high-performance engines under a name that would become legend among those who knew. These were not ordinary production engines with a sticker on them. They were race engines, hand-assembled, built from the strongest materials, designed for one purpose, which was to beat everyone else on a Sunday. When Pontiac restyled its full-size cars for 1961, the Catalina became the lightest and least expensive of them. For a racer, that weight saving was gold. Here was a big, roomy car that was, by the standards of its full-size rivals, surprisingly light, and Pontiac could drop its most powerful engines into it. In late 1961, Pontiac unleashed the engine that would define the legend. A 421 cubic inch Super Duty V8. On paper, the factory rated it conservatively at 405 horsepower. In reality, everyone knew that figure was a polite fiction. The true output was closer to 460 horsepower, and racing versions made well over 500. This was a street-legal engine with the internals of a pure racing motor, a 4-bolt main block, a forged steel crankshaft, forged rods, solid lifters, NASCAR cylinder heads, and a pair of enormous 4-barrel carburetors sitting on an aluminum intake. It was, in every meaningful sense, a race engine that the law happened to allow on the street. And that phrase, that the law happened to allow it, is the key to the whole strange story. Pontiac did not really want to sell this monster to the general public. It wanted to race it. But the racing authorities created a rule that changed everything. The NHRA, the body that governed drag racing, declared that for an engine to compete in its production-based stock classes, that engine and its key body parts had to be genuine production pieces, things a regular customer could actually order and buy. This is the principle called homologation. To race it, you must sell it. So Pontiac was, in effect, forced to put its savage 421 Super Duty. It became an expensive, limited production option on the full-size Catalina. And this is why a handful of ordinary-looking family Pontiacs left the factory in 1962, carrying one of the most powerful engines in the country. Pontiac was not building a dream car for enthusiasts. it was satisfying a rule book. In 1962, its peak year, fewer than 180 cars were built with the 421 Super Duty engine, and most of those were Catalinas, with a small number going into the Grand Prix. These were not mass-market machines. They were rare, costly, and aimed squarely at people who intended to race them. And Pontiac took the idea even further. It created the lightweight cars, and what it did to them was almost unbelievable. Pontiac drilled the car's steel frame full of holes, earning these cars a nickname that has lived on ever since, the Swiss Cheese Catalinas. They wore aluminum body panels, aluminum bumpers, and had the sound deadening and the comfort equipment stripped right out. A relatively standard Super Duty Catalina could run the quarter mile in around 13.5 seconds, at over 100 miles an hour. The lightweight Swiss cheese cars were brutally quicker, dropping into the low 12-second range at over 115 miles an hour. Pontiac's drivers, men like the marketing genius Jim Wangers, took these cars to drag strips across the country and won, again and again. The big, humble-looking Catalina had become a giant killer. To a spectator at a drag strip in 1962, the staging lanes were full of cars that looked like they belonged there, purpose-built machines, stripped and snarling. And then, a full-size Pontiac, a car that looked like it should be carrying groceries, would roll to the line and launch, and simply leave them behind. There was something almost insulting about it. The Catalina did not look fast. It looked respectable. And that respectability made every victory sting a little more for the cars it beat. And then, almost overnight, the Catalina was erased from history. The instrument of that erasure was built by Pontiac itself. In early 1963, the management of General Motors issued a sudden and sweeping ban on all factory involvement in racing. For Pontiac, whose entire new identity had been built on winning races, this was a catastrophe. The Super Duty program, the engines, the lightweight cars, the whole glorious effort, was killed almost instantly. The 421 Super Duty had existed for barely 2 model years. The factory racing weapon was gone. But Pontiac's hunger for performance did not die. It simply changed shape. Forbidden from going racing, Pontiac's engineers found another way to sell speed. They took the engine out of a big car and put it into a smaller, lighter, mid-size one. In 1964, they bolted a large V8 into the intermediate Tempest, gave it a memorable name borrowed from Ferrari, Gran Turismo Omologato, and called it the GTO. It was a sensation, and crucially, this time, Pontiac sold it not through racing victories, but through brilliant, aggressive marketing aimed directly at young buyers. The genius of the GTO was never really the engineering. The formula already existed. The genius was the packaging. It had a small, light, affordable body that made the big engine feel even more outrageous. It had a name that sounded exotic and rebellious, and it had an advertising campaign that spoke directly to teenagers and to the people who wanted to feel like teenagers. The GTO did not win on Sundays and let the legend follow. It manufactured the legend directly and sold it by the hundreds of thousands. And here is the cruel irony at the center of this story. The man who marketed the GTO so brilliantly was Jim Wangers, the very same man who had been winning races in the Super Duty Catalina just months before. The people who created the GTO legend were the same people who had built the Catalina's forgotten one. They simply pointed all of their genius at the new, smaller, marketable car. The GTO got the name, the advertising, the youth campaign, and the historical credit for inventing the muscle car. The Catalina, which had been doing the same thing harder and earlier, got nothing. It had no catchy three-letter name. It had no marketing campaign. It had only been first. And this is what makes the Catalina such a quietly important car. We tell the history of the muscle car as a clean origin story. The GTO arrived in 1964 and invented the breed. It is a tidy, satisfying tale. It is also not quite true. The formula, a big, powerful engine in a streetable American car, sold to ordinary people. The GTO did not invent the idea. It perfected the marketing of the idea. What the Catalina's story really teaches is uncomfortable. History does not always remember what was first or what was best. The Catalina Super Duty was faster than most of what came after it, rarer than almost all of it, and genuinely earlier than the car that gets the credit. But it was a homologation special with a plain name and no advertising budget, and so it slipped through the cracks of memory, while the GTO became a household word. There is a strange justice, though, in how the story has ended. Because the Catalina Super Duty was so rare, very few were preserved with the care that famous muscle cars received. They did not always think to save a barely known family sedan. And so, the genuine survivors that remain are now treated with the reverence the car always deserved. A real 421 Super Duty Catalina today can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The market, at last, recognizing what history overlooked. The survivors have become priceless precisely because the world spent 60 years forgetting they mattered. American muscle car history overcredits the cars that were marketed as performance and undercredits the cars that simply were. The Catalina Super Duty was the great forgotten muscle car of the 1960s, a barely legal race engine hidden in a family body, winning on Sundays 2 full years before a younger, smaller, better marketed sibling took its idea and all of its glory. It did everything the legend would later be praised for. It just never got the name. And the lesson it leaves behind is one worth carrying out of the garage and into the rest of life. Being first is not the same as being remembered, and the loudest legend is rarely the one that did it first. Before you go, the real history of the muscle car is bigger than the legend. Stay with us. The next chapter is already on the channel.